Hello, my name's Jolie Miles. And last week, my own sister, yes, a flight attendant, snatched my luxury bag mid-flight and accused me of stealing from an elderly man. But here's what she didn't know. I'm the chief service officer of the very airline she works for. She called security, the officer arrived, and then he cuffed her. Now I ask you, how do you forgive a family that only sees your worth when it threatens their lives? What happened next? Well, you'll want to hear this. They say the early morning hours carry truth in them. Everything is quieter, slower, clearer, if you're willing to listen. But this morning, nothing felt clear. I stood there at Gate C-22 in Dallas-Fort Worth International, dressed sharp but understated. Navy blazer, pressed trousers, heels that clicked confidence but not arrogance. Still, something inside me churned like I'd swallowed a live wire. Just coffee, right? I mumbled to myself. That's all it was supposed to be. Coffee. A routine check-in flight, an unannounced crew evaluation I had scheduled weeks ago. As the chief service officer for Air Valor Airlines, I often boarded flights incognito to assess staff interactions and customer care. But what I hadn't planned was Elowen. "Jolie! Well, isn't this a surprise?" Her voice rang out before I even cleared the counter. Loud, sweet, too sweet. She practically sang my name with a grin wide enough to stretch skin. I hadn't seen her in over a month, maybe more. And here she was, in uniform, perfectly pressed, platinum blonde bob gleaming under airport fluorescence, greeting me like we were best friends in front of her crew. My stomach dropped. She's never invited me anywhere just to be kind, I thought. Before I could return her smile with something polite but firm, she leaned in, her voice dipped just below professional range. "Fancy seeing the big boss flying with her little people." Then she snapped back to performance mode. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest flying with us today," she chirped to the waiting crew and passengers behind me. "Our very own CSO, Miss Jolie Miles." Cue the slow turn of heads, a few raised eyebrows, someone actually clapped. I wanted to disappear. I forced a tight smile. "Just here to observe quietly. Please, continue as normal." "Oh, of course," Elowen giggled. "We'll treat you just like anyone else." She turned and walked away before I could respond, heels clicking with the rhythm of someone who thinks she's untouchable. As I handed over my boarding pass, two frequent flyers whispered behind me. "Is that Elowen's assistant or something?" one asked. "No clue," the other muttered. "Guess she's riding coattails now." I bit the inside of my cheek. Elowen heard it. I knew she did. But she said nothing. No correction, no courtesy. Just a flick of her manicured fingers and a nod to the crew to begin boarding. Walking down the jet bridge, I could already feel the imbalance, like a Thanksgiving years ago when Elowen invited a surprise guest and I was told to give up my seat. "You're always so accommodating," Mom had said. I remembered standing there, holding my plate like a maid at my own family table. That feeling came rushing back. This plane wasn't just a flight, it was a replay. New setting, same roles. Row 3, aisle seat. That was mine. My assigned seat on this internal route. I sat down, pulled out my tablet, and tried to breathe through the rising tension. Then came the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for boarding with us this morning. We have a very special member of our team joining us in row 3. Let's give a warm welcome to our Chief Service Officer, Jolie Miles." I froze. That voice. That tone. Elowen again. She drew it out like she was announcing a celebrity. I felt passengers glance over. Some even nodded politely. I forced a laugh to myself. "And just like that, she's turned this into a circus." The man in 3B leaned over. "You Elowen's sister?" he asked. I nodded. "She speaks highly of herself," he smirked. I turned to the window, hoping he wouldn't push further. Outside, the tarmac glowed gold under the early light. But inside me, shadows stirred. Halfway through boarding, Elowen passed my row. She leaned in slightly, smiled so no one else could see her lips move. "Let's not forget who built their career the old-fashioned way," she whispered. "Some of us didn't climb with titles. We earned our stripes." Then she glided off, leaving a waft of designer perfume and bitterness behind her. I adjusted my seatbelt, ignoring the heat in my ears. I've learned to win silently, I told myself. I didn't come here for war, but if it comes, I won't run. The door sealed with a low thump. The engines hummed. Everyone settled. I caught Elowen whispering something to a younger flight attendant, an intern maybe, and gesturing toward me. Their eyes flicked to my bag, then away. My luxury handbag, burgundy leather, structured edges. A gift I gave myself after securing the VP promotion 2 years ago. It sat on my lap like armor. She was setting something in motion. I felt it. Still, I stayed calm, composed, professional. Always professional. But I should have known, when the flight door shut, that something much worse had already been set in motion. The hum of the engines had settled into that strange kind of silence only planes produce. Steady, monotonous, almost soothing if you let yourself sink into it. 90 minutes into the flight, we were cruising at 35,000 feet, somewhere above scattered tufts of cloud that looked like chalk smudges on a blue slate. I sat in 14C, one leg crossed over the other, jotting half-legible notes on the fold-down tray in front of me. Evaluations, observations, habitual details I always collected. The crew was decent, maybe a little too eager, their movements stiff with nerves whenever they came near me. They knew who I was. They were trying, and I gave them silent credit for that. My navy Celine tote rested across my lap, right where I'd placed it when I boarded. It wasn't just a bag, it was a ledger of my life. It had traveled with me through the clean sterility of boardrooms, across the bitter sting of divorce courts, and even through a summer of Lisbon sunlight, where I'd tried to remember what it felt like to breathe without pressure. My fingers traced the leather edges unconsciously, a private gesture of grounding. That was when I heard them. Heels. Not the quick, clipped steps of a flight attendant checking on passengers. Not the uncertain shuffle of someone stretching their legs in the aisle. No, this was deliberate, almost militaristic. Click, 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 like a metronome counting down to confrontation. I looked up, and there she was, Elowen. She didn't speak, not at first. Her eyes locked on me, sharp as razors, and before I could brace, her hand shot across the aisle. She snatched the tote off my lap with a force so sudden it tilted my tray table, nearly spilling the notepad to the floor. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice snapped louder than intended, and I rose halfway out of my seat. Elowen lifted the bag high, like she'd just won some prize fight, and turned to face the cabin. Her smile stretched, brittle, and rehearsed. "This doesn't belong to her," she announced, her tone rising like a prosecutor's. "It belongs to the gentleman in 14A. The effect was immediate. Audible gasps rippled through the rows. Heads turned. Passengers craned their necks to look at the man in 14A. An elderly traveler slumped against the window, blissfully napping, completely unaware that he'd just been cast as the star witness in Elowen's manufactured theater. My chest tightened, but I forced calm. "You can't be serious," I said evenly. Elowen's gaze cut back to me, eyes gleaming with false innocence. Her lips curved into that smirk I knew too well. "You really want to go there?" she asked, her voice pitched just high enough to carry across 3 rows. "Stealing from an old man on your own airline? What were you thinking?" The whispers began at once, jagged and insidious. Someone murmured, "Is this for real?" Another hissed, "That's the CSO, right?" The labels spread like static, embedding themselves before facts could. She knew exactly what she was doing. This was never about a bag. This was about humiliation, loud, public, unretractable. "That's my bag," I said, firm enough that my words carried over the murmurs. She laughed, harsh and staged, the sound bouncing too bright off the narrow cabin walls. "Oh, really?" she sneered. "Like a regional officer could afford this?" She held the bag aloft, twisting it in her grip so everyone could see the designer label like it was Exhibit A. "Tell me again how you managed that on your salary." Her cruelty was deliberate. Her voice dripped disdain. The old man in 14A stirred at the sound, confused by the commotion. His wrinkled brow furrowed, eyes blinking open slowly. Elowen leaned toward him, her tone suddenly saccharine. "Sir," she coaxed sweetly. I believe this belongs to you? He blinked at the bag, then at her, then at me. I've never seen that bag before in my life, he said finally, voice slow but clear. Silence, dense and heavy. Elowen's performance faltered, just for a beat, but she quickly recovered. She turned back to the passengers, sighing dramatically. He's old, she explained with false pity. Probably forgot. It's okay. I stopped her just in time. Stopped me? Heat prickled up my spine. My jaw clenched tight. For years I had kept my voice leashed, had let others dictate the narrative. But not this time. Elowen, I said, each word cut clean. Open it. Right now. Open the damn bag. For the first time, hesitation flickered in her eyes. Passengers leaned forward, their curiosity magnetic. The man beside me shifted in his seat, awkwardly caught in the firestorm. I could feel the weight of attention pressing in, the air electric. Inside, I continued, my voice steady as steel, you'll find my wallet, my ID, my name printed clear as daylight. And while you're at it, pull out the Ferrari key fob. Fun fact, nobody drives that car but me. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Someone near the back whispered, Ferrari? Elowen unzipped the bag with deliberate slowness. The sound of the zipper was a blade cutting through tension. One by one, she pulled out the contents. My wallet, my passport, my ID card, my face staring back in laminated indifference. Then, gleaming under the cabin lights, the black and chrome Ferrari fob. Each item stripped her expression tighter, but she clung to her performance. She forced a smile, poisonous in its calm. People like you, she said softly, her tone sugared with venom, always come prepared. Planting props, playing innocent. People like you, the words hit harder than a slap. Not just an insult, an insinuation. Loaded, coded. The kind of phrase that dripped with unspoken malice. The kind of phrase that drew a line between me and everyone else. Around us, I saw faces shift, discomfort spreading. They heard it. They understood what she meant. I inhaled deeply, holding the fury inside. You done? I asked. She didn't answer. I turned to the young flight attendant standing frozen nearby. Mark, barely 24, pale as parchment, his fingers twitching near the intercom button. You saw the ID, I told him. You heard the man in 14A. Are you really going to let this go on? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His gaze darted between Elowen and me, torn between fear and responsibility. Passengers were no longer whispering. They were silent now, watching with sharpened eyes, waiting for the next move. And then, ding, the overhead call light lit up. Row 15. Another ding. Row 17. Someone had called the cockpit. Elowen's posture shifted. She felt the tide turning. I sat back in my seat, calm settling over me like armor. The bag still dangled in her hands, but her victory had already dissolved. Moments later, the cabin door at the front clicked open. A voice, clear and commanding, carried down the aisle. Both our names, summoned forward. And I knew, when the plane touched down, when that door opened fully and the waiting figures stepped inside, the whole cabin would hold its breath. Because what was coming next would change everything. The landing gear groaned and hissed as it lowered into place, a vibration that rattled faintly through the floorboards beneath our feet. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, practiced, full of the usual reassurances. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be touching down shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts. But the words barely registered. The real sound in that cabin wasn't the pilot's voice. It was silence. The tense, quivering silence of 100 people holding their breath at once. A few passengers tilted their phones, half hidden behind headrests, sly little black mirrors waiting to catch whatever came next. You could see the hunger in their eyes. If this explodes, I'll have proof I was here. The lights dimmed just slightly, softening the harsh edges of faces, but not enough to erase the judgment. Not enough to stop the whisper of accusations still lingering like static in the recycled air. I stayed rooted in seat 14C. My tray table was up now, my notepad tucked away, my spine pressed firmly against the seat back. but every part of me was coiled, watchful, ready. My gaze followed Elowen 2 rows ahead. She still clutched my Celine tote like it was her victory banner. Her shoulders pulled back, her chin tilted too high, her lips pressed into the same thin, triumphant line I knew from years ago. I knew that posture. God, I knew it. It was the same one she used the night she broke Grandma's vase in the living room and then pointed her finger at me before our parents walked in. Elowen had always known how to weaponize performance. She wasn't just holding a bag, she was holding a story, one she believed she could rewrite in real time. I looked around the cabin. The stares were everywhere. Some sympathetic, brows furrowed in quiet solidarity. Others cold, suspicious, already choosing sides without waiting for proof. I was familiar with those looks. I'd grown up with them. And then, without warning, memory surged. Not a faint recollection, but a full-body return. Thanksgiving, Atlanta, the year I turned 12. The house smelled of cornbread and sweet potato pie, warmth layered over warmth, the clatter of silverware mixed with grown-up laughter. Elowen, 15 and golden even then, sat at the head of the kids' table, recounting some honors class anecdote while Mama looked on like she was listening to a sermon. I had spent the whole week hunched over cardboard, glue sticking my fingers together, carefully crafting a solar system for science class. It wasn't perfect, mercury fell off more times than I could count, but it was mine. I held it up that night, cheeks burning with excitement. "Look, Mama, see what I made." She smiled quickly. But her eyes slid back to Elowen. "Not now, baby. Let your sister finish." Just like that, I learned silence was safer than rejection. I folded my project under the chair, hid my pride, and trained my face into a quiet smile. Back in the present, 30 years later, the sting came fresh. Because I realized Elowen hadn't stopped teaching me that lesson. She was still standing at the center while I was still told, in one form or another, to sit quietly on the edge. Not anymore. I reached into my jacket pocket, slow and deliberate. My fingers brushed the familiar leather of my wallet. I pulled it out, lifted it high enough for the nearest passengers to see. I flipped it open with practiced ease. The ID card gleamed under the cabin lights. My photo, sharp and recent. The bold lettering underneath. Air Valor, Chief Service Officer. Jolie, A. Whitman. Mark, the young attendant lingering near the galley, caught the motion. His lips parted. He wanted to say something, but his voice died before it left his throat. Elowen turned, catching the movement. Her eyes narrowed, mouth curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Nice prop," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm, loud enough for the entire row to hear. "But props don't fly planes, sis." The delivery was perfect, like a rehearsed punchline. A few nervous chuckles broke from passengers who didn't know where else to put their unease. The sound sliced through me sharper than her words. I didn't give her the dignity of an answer, didn't meet her eyes. Instead, I turned toward the window. The view stretched endless, an ocean of white cloud, cotton piled high beneath a pale horizon. My breath slowed. I've flown thousands of hours, I reminded myself. I know the difference between a prop and a purpose. I tucked the wallet into my lap, careful, deliberate. My mind spun like the engine turbines outside, quiet but relentless. This was never just about a designer bag. This was about decades of Thanksgiving dinners, of school recitals ignored, of conversations where my voice was drowned out. This was about every silence I had swallowed, and I was done swallowing. There were cameras on board. FAA regulations required certain sections of the cabin be recorded, the galleys, the service lanes, the front of each aisle. The footage would show her hand yanking the bag from my lap. The footage would show the man in 14A blinking groggily and swearing he'd never seen it before. That alone should have ended this charade. But it hadn't, because this wasn't about truth. It was about performance. My gaze drifted back to Mark. He stood stiff, hands clasped, his shoulders pressed into the galley wall like he wanted to vanish. He wasn't just a flight attendant right now. He was the embodiment of every bystander who'd watched Elowen spin her stories and decided it was easier to stay quiet. Elowen just accused the chief service officer of theft, I thought grimly. And he's paralyzed by rank. A whisper slipped from me, so soft it barely disturbed the air. If I let this pass, I allow more to believe I'm less than I am. The cabin lights flickered back to brighter daylight, a subtle shift that seemed to announce the stage was open again. Still, no captain. Still, no resolution. That was when I caught it. A flicker of expression, just beyond Elowin. Leora, one of the junior attendants, leaned near her shoulder. Her lips curved into a smirk, smug and complicit. Not nervous, not hesitant. Complicit. I recognized that look instantly. I'd seen it across boardroom tables, in rival offices, in the faces of people who thought they could use cruelty as a shortcut to power. It was the look of someone who thought they had already won. Fine. Let them believe it. If it was a performance they wanted, then the truth would be my finale. I straightened in my seat, uncrossed and recrossed my legs with a deliberate calm, and placed both hands flat on my thighs, my posture open, my gaze level, my silence unbroken. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to beg, I just had to wait, because when the wheels touched down and the doors opened, the show would end. And this time, when I spoke, the entire cabin, the entire world watching through their phones, would have no choice but to listen. The cabin door latched shut with a metallic click, the kind of sound that usually promised closure, safety, finality. But tonight, it was a trap. The wheels had kissed the tarmac with their soft, rubbery groan, yet the energy inside that airplane didn't relax. It coiled tighter, sharper, as if every passenger could feel that the landing hadn't ended the ordeal, only transformed it. The engines whined low. The hum of the jet bridge machinery droned faint in the distance, echoing like war drums against the pressurized silence. Flight attendants began their rehearsed ballet, checking overhead bins, reminding passengers to remain seated, thanking them for flying. But their smiles were brittle. Their glances darted nervously toward the center of the cabin where Elowin stood in the aisle, still clutching my Celine bag to her chest like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom drama she had staged herself. Around her, passengers jostled for their coats and carry-ons, but no one dared make too much noise. Every head swiveled back, every phone screen tilted discreetly, some already glowing red with the record button. You could feel it in the air, the hunger for spectacle, the voyeuristic appetite to witness someone's dignity rise or be destroyed in real time. I rose slowly from seat 14C. The motion was deliberate, my knees stiff, my boots planted with care against the narrow strip of carpet between the seats. I could feel my stomach churn, threatening to relapse into nausea, but I breathed it down and straightened my spine until it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about fear now. It was about claim. Elowin! My voice rang out, cutting clean through the hush. I projected with every ounce of calm authority I'd earned over years of silence, not shrill, not desperate, steady, clear, a voice that could not be ignored. You took it from his lap without asking. You staged this entire moment. Her head snapped toward me, lips curling into that thin blade of a smile she had perfected since childhood. The contempt in her eyes glittered under the cabin lights. You think you're above suspicion just because of your title? She said, her tone dripping with icy disdain, loud enough to carry to row 20. My ribs tightened, old wounds clawed at me. But I leaned forward into the narrow aisle, close enough that the passengers around us felt the weight of my words reverberating. Don't reduce me to your petty assumptions. You want proof? Check the camera. 14 row midsection, right where we boarded. Her face flickered. Just for a moment, she knew exactly what I meant. The airport-style surveillance camera installed by FAA mandate, the one that recorded the boarding and midsection aisle continuously, would show her yanking the bag from my lap. If she dared push this further, she'd have to answer to more than just my word. And then it happened. 2 rows behind me, a woman stood up, middle-aged, composed, but her face carried the certainty of someone who knew her truth mattered. She raised her phone high above her head, the glow of the screen illuminating the cabin like a flare in the dark. I filmed it, she announced, voice ringing like a bell. She never touched the old man's bag. Gasps rippled down the aisle. Heads turned. Whispers began to hiss between passengers. She's right. I saw it. That isn't her bag at all. Elowen's face paled. Her carefully constructed mask of superiority faltered. A tremor cracked across her composure, so slight but undeniable. Her jaw tightened as she spat back. "You people don't know what you saw." Her eyes darted to the phone screens, to the glowing witnesses, and then back to me. The crowd's attention had shifted. Her calm mask was splintering, and she knew it. I caught my breath and let the silence deepen. I didn't need to yell. Instead, I let my words fall soft, each syllable landing like a gavel. I didn't come here for chaos. I came for dignity. Phones clicked. Someone's flash lit the narrow aisle. A hush descended, the kind that separates spectacle from justice. For a brief moment, I felt the blade of power tipping, no longer pointed at me, but back toward her. Elowen's lips twitched, desperate to retort, to claw her way back into control. "We'll see how far that gets you," she snapped, forcing a harsh laugh that sounded like glass cracking under strain. It was a performance, thrown toward the gathering crowd as if they were her jury, but her voice betrayed her, sharp edges trembling beneath the polish. My mind sharpened too, every nerve a wire humming with clarity. I thought, if you force me, I will respond, but I won't descend to your level. Strength under pressure is silence, not reaction. The cabin lurched then, a sudden turbulence brushing the fuselage, rattling the overhead bins. The lights flickered once, twice, phones lit up brighter, fingers fumbling to hold steady recordings. Crew members froze at their posts, caught between duty and disbelief. The engines hummed like nervous insects in the pause. Then the captain's voice broke over the intercom, taut and deliberate. "Crew to cabin, please stand by for landing instructions." That pause, that unspoken weight in his tone, it was as though even he sensed the tension had less to do with weather and more to do with the storm inside. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, their gazes flicking back and forth between Elowen and me. The weight of expectation pressed in heavy, almost suffocating. The aisle had become an arena. I reached out and clasped the strap of my bag, still in her grip. I didn't yank. I didn't wrestle. I simply touched it and held it, not as shield but as statement. This is mine. My name, my work, my worth, and I will not let you erase it. Behind me, she faltered. Her lips parted, but no words came. I turned my head just enough to catch the expression flickering across her face, regret tangled with fear, calculation battling with collapse. The plane jolted once more with turbulence, but this time it wasn't me who trembled. The collective exhale of the passengers seemed to carry with it a shift in energy, away from her performance, toward my reclamation. I swallowed, pulse steadying at last. I didn't need to shout, not yet, because I knew when the doors opened, the truth would step off this plane with me. Not just the truth of a bag, but the truth of every silenced thanksgiving, every erased page, every indignity swallowed. We were on the cusp of something irreversible. When the landing gear locked into place with that familiar mechanical groan, I braced myself, not for the physical impact of descent, but for the collision of truth and perception that had been building since takeoff. I could feel the tremor inside me coil tighter, preparing to break free. As the wheels kissed the tarmac with a muted thud, the entire cabin seemed to flinch at once. It wasn't turbulence or a rough landing. It was the weight of what had been simmering between two sisters, now ready to boil over in front of a plane full of strangers. The engine softened into a low hum as we taxied toward the gate. Normally, this was the part of a flight where people relaxed, the sigh of relief, the chatter of plans, the shuffle of belongings. But here, the air felt suspended, as if every passenger sensed they were caught in the middle of something larger than themselves. Even the crew, trained to glide through chaos, betrayed themselves. The subtle shuffle in the galley, the rigid posture of attendants standing guard, the crackle of unease along the intercom. Elowen still clutched my Celine tote in her manicured hands, her knuckles white against the leather as if the bag itself were her final lifeline. Her voice, when she muttered something under her breath, had lost its earlier venom. It trembled, uneven, the sound of someone who realized her stage lights were dimming. I exhaled slowly, a long release that felt heavier than air. My jaw ached from the tension I had held since the moment she ripped that bag from my lap. Enough. I rose from seat 14C, planting my boots firmly in the narrow aisle. The fabric of my jacket pulled tight across my shoulders as I straightened, forcing myself into posture, into presence. Dozens of eyes tracked my movement, some curious, some skeptical, some quietly sympathetic. Phones glimmered like watchful eyes in the dimmed cabin light, their tiny red recording dots glowing like embers. I turned toward Elowen, voice calm but strong, carrying just enough to slice through the low hum of whispers. "If you think I stole that bag," I said, measured and deliberate, "then I invite you, all of you, to check the cameras. Every frame, exactly what happened right here, in the aisle by row 14, will be recorded." I let the words hang in the air. No apology, no concession, just fact. Mark, the young flight attendant who had been paralyzed between sisterly loyalty and professional duty all flight, shifted uneasily behind me. He looked between us, lips parting as though to speak, then closing again. His eyes flickered toward Elowen, hesitant, uncertain, then darted back to me. For the first time, I saw a crack in his indecision. Truth weighed heavier than fear. Elowen reacted quickly, her voice snapping like a whip. "Control your ego," she hissed, tone pitched high enough for half the cabin to hear. "You think you're above suspicion just because you hold a title." A few heads turned sharply. One man across the aisle muttered, "Is she serious?" Another woman shook her head in disbelief. The murmurs weren't supportive this time. They were laced with doubt, directed at her, not me. I kept my tone even. "Do you think this is a game?" I asked, my gaze steady, my voice steady. "Do you really believe I'm buying respect through a title?" Her rebuttal caught in her throat. For the first time, her performance stumbled. Without flourish, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I pressed the record button quietly, the red dot blooming on the screen like a promise. No theatrics, just documentation. Elowen's eyes widened. Her mask faltered. She stepped forward, hand outstretched, voice a sharp hiss. "Put that away!" I retracted the phone slowly, but not in surrender. "I will not let you gaslight me in front of witnesses," I said, each word deliberate, my voice threading into the silence. "If you persist, I will involve corporate. This isn't a popularity contest, and I don't need to beg for respect." The atmosphere shifted palpably. From row 16, a gentle voice spoke up. Clear, calm, undeniable. "She has every right." Heads turned. More voices murmured in agreement. The tide had turned. Entertainment was becoming reckoning. Mark moved closer, drawn by the momentum. His jaw tightened, and though he didn't say it aloud, I saw it in his stance. Solidarity. Not with Elowen, with me. Elowen's glare sharpened, but the cracks in her poise spread wide enough for everyone to see. Her words scrambled, desperate. "I'm trying to help. I stopped something harmful." But the conviction was gone. The veneer had peeled away, leaving her exposed. I didn't answer. I let silence be my argument. Sometimes stillness is stronger than speech. Sometimes the quiet becomes the gavel. The plane jolted suddenly, a final brush of turbulence rattling the overhead bins. The lights flickered once, twice. Gasps rippled through the passengers, but the focus didn't break. Eyes stayed locked on us, on the drama no one had asked for, but everyone was now invested in. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice, calm but taut, filtered through. "Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for a possible unscheduled stop." The words landed like a thunderclap. Passengers stiffened. Someone whispered, "What does that mean?" But I knew. It meant escalation. It meant officials on the jet bridge. It meant accountability waiting the moment the door opened. My grip tightened on the strap of the bag, my bag, still half trapped in her grasp. It wasn't just leather. It wasn't just designer branding. It was everything she had tried to strip from me. Evidence, identity, boundary. And as the engines hummed low, guiding us toward the gate, I felt the weight of something irreversible. This flight would land me more than at a destination. It would land me at a confrontation that could no longer be delayed. The cabin lurched softly as the aircraft rolled to its final stop. The landing gear hissed beneath us, brakes squealing faintly, and then came the muted thud of the door mechanism unlocking. That sound, usually background noise, struck me like a drumbeat announcing judgment. Every passenger seemed to feel it. The air stilled. Conversations died mid-sentence. You could almost hear the collective shift in posture, people straightening in their seats, eyes lifting toward the aisle, anticipation drawing taut like a bowstring. Then they appeared, not flight crew, not attendants. The kind of presence that makes a space shrink with their arrival, men and women in gray uniforms, name badges gleaming under the fluorescent cabin lights, radios clipped at their belts, airport security. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Their measured stride carried the authority of inevitability, like judges entering a courtroom where the verdict was already written. I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. This was it. The stage Elowen had insisted upon. She had dragged me here, into this spectacle, and now the curtain was coming down. One officer emerged from the galley and strode directly toward row 14. His boots pressed evenly against the carpet, every step unhurried, every gesture controlled. He stopped in front of me, his expression calm but unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, voice level, professional. "May I see your credentials?" There it was, the question Elowen had been salivating for, the question she believed would expose me as an imposter, a fraud, someone who didn't belong in the seat, in the uniform, in this life. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I reached for my wallet slowly, deliberately. From inside, I withdrew the identification I carried not as an ornament, but as proof of years carved from blood, sweat, and silence. The CSO badge, my corporate ID, my staff number, etched clear in bold black ink. I placed them neatly on the tray table, angled so the light caught the embossing just right. My name reflected back at me, Jolie A. Miles, Chief Service Officer, Air Valor Airlines. The officer leaned forward slightly, scanning the details. Recognition flickered across his features, a subtle lift of the brows, a fractional shift in his stance. He knew the title. He knew its weight. Around us, heads turned. Passengers craned their necks, eyes darting between me, the badge, and Elowen. A collective murmur rippled through the rows, some astonished, others almost sheepish. For the first time, Elowen's face drained of color. Her composure, polished to a perfect sheen all flight, cracked around the edges. She had expected me to hesitate, to falter, to stutter my way into shame. Instead, I sat still, shoulders squared, truth glinting under fluorescent light. The officer straightened, his voice carrying enough gravity to reach the nearby rows. He turned first to Elowen, then let his gaze sweep across the entire cabin. "You're aware," he said slowly, "that you've accused a senior official of theft?" His tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't even scolding. It was worse. It was factual, undeniable, binding. It turned the spotlight where it belonged. Elowen's lips parted. She tried to conjure words. I thought... Her voice wavered, breaking like glass dropped onto marble. She glanced at the passengers, searching for an ally. None spoke. Silence pressed down like a weight. Inside me, something loosened. For decades, I'd been the invisible one, the afterthought at dinners, the overlooked child in family photos, the quiet worker in the shadow of louder siblings, always minimized, always told, implicitly or explicitly, that my worth was conditional. But in this instant, with that badge displayed before strangers, I realized I was no longer invisible. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply leaned forward slightly and said, clear enough for all to hear, "You saw me, but you didn't see me until the badge mattered." It wasn't accusation. It wasn't bitterness. It was fact, carved raw and unvarnished. The words hung in the air like a bell still vibrating long after the strike. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, others nodded quietly. A few murmured assent. Truth had a strange way of redistributing weight. It pressed heavy on some and lightened others. The officer's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He gave a single, measured nod. Around us, the cabin energy shifted. No longer spectacle, no longer entertainment. Something else had entered. Respect, perhaps. Or reckoning. Elowen's hands trembled against the bag she still clutched. She tried again, desperation strangling her words. You don't understand. But the words lacked body. They were paper thin, collapsing as soon as they hit the air. Passengers stared at her, not with the blind support she expected, but with the detached curiosity one reserves for a failed performance. Her authority, so carefully constructed, had crumbled mid-sentence. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. I sat back, inhaled deeply, and let the vindication wash over me. Not triumph, not vengeance, but something sturdier. Vindication wasn't about winning, it was about being seen. Finally, the officer cleared his throat and addressed the cabin. "We'll be escorting Ms. Sable off the aircraft for questioning." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The statement carried its own finality. Elowyn's jaw worked, teeth grinding behind closed lips. She raised a hand as if to argue, to reclaim some sliver of dignity. But no words followed. She swallowed them back down, and in that silence, the performance ended. I gripped the strap of my bag and pulled it close, not to shield myself, but to reclaim what had been mine all along. The front door of the cabin opened with a hiss. Bright jet bridge lights spilled in, stark against the dim cabin glow. Security staff stood waiting just beyond the threshold, posture alert, eyes steady. Passengers held their phones lower now, as if reverence had replaced voyeurism. Cameras still hovered, but the energy wasn't hungry anymore. It was heavy. It was history being written in quiet strokes. As the officer gestured for Elowyn to rise, I stayed seated, spine straight, breathing measured. I wasn't smug. I wasn't cruel. I was resolute. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl Elowyn tried to humiliate. I wasn't the shadow in her narrative. I was the truth she couldn't silence. And as the officer guided her down the aisle, I looked ahead toward the jet bridge, not at her retreating figure, but at the light spilling from beyond. Because I knew, landing was not the end. Landing was only the beginning of unveiling everything. When the door slid open at the jet bridge, silence crashed in behind us. The hiss of fresh air displaced the stale cabin hush, and I stepped onto solid ground. I carried my handbag as though it were a shield, and because, in many ways, it had become one. Security agents formed a corridor. Cabin crew retreated to the sides, faces tense, phones half raised, passengers crowded forward, eyes wide, lips parted. I stood firm in the threshold, the burgundy leather strap draped across my forearm. Just behind me, the metallic clink of the handcuffs echoed. Elowyn's uniform jacket clung awkwardly around her shoulders now that the confident mask had cracked. I felt a surge. I had waited a lifetime for this moment. A guard bent down near the aisle. He opened the handbag flap that Elowyn had held so tightly. A folded piece of paper slipped out and landed on the floor. He stooped, picked it up, unfolded it. I demanded, "Give that to me." The guard did, reading softly from it as he stepped back. "To my daughter, the one I always believed in." He recited a line about trust, faith, that had once hung above late-night prayers. Elowyn froze, her composure unraveling. Those words were a memory she'd never meant for the public eye. A few rows back, someone whispered, "Is that their father's handwriting?" Another voice, "That line. He always said that to Jolie." The memory tore through her. Her face slackened, eyes wide with dread. A crew member held up a tablet showing cabin camera footage. In replay, Elowyn moved quickly at the gate before boarding, swapping two identical-looking bags side by side. The camera angle caught the switch. As the crowd watched, murmurs rippled. She did it. That proves everything. I felt tears, but not of regret. Tears of release. She had set the stage for me to perform my lowest moment. Now I was unmasking hers. Across the aisle, a senior manager from Air Valor appeared, suit jacket open, expression unreadable. Her assistants trailed behind, holding tablets, nodding at the footage. Security officers flanked Elowyn and me. "Miss Sable," the manager said, voice calm but resolute. "You have been implicated in misconduct. We will conduct a full investigation. In the meantime, you are barred from duty pending review." The manager turned to me. "Ms. Miles, we apologize for the incident. Thank you to those who came forward with evidence." Elowyn opened her mouth to speak, but no words emerged. The crowd's sympathy had shifted. The woman behind me, whose phone had captured the first accusation, teared up. I saw her switch it. Others nodded, confirming. I stood quietly, absorbing the shift. It wasn't vindication I craved, but justice. The manager motioned to security. Elowen was escorted, her head down, uniform creased now like a last stand. The cabin watched her go. I tightened my grip on the bag. I turned to face the passengers and crew. No triumph, just calm. They say truth always catches up. What they decide next will echo beyond today. Stepping off the jet bridge, my heels hit the tile floor of the arrival hall with purpose, as though announcing I had arrived not just on the ground, but into reckoning. The roar of engines behind us faded, replaced by hushed murmurs. Cameras flashed, airline staff formed a semicircle. The air tasted like tension and triumph intertwined. Elowen stumbled behind me, her face pale, shoulders weighted. The smugness she'd worn earlier had melted away, exposed to daylight. Whispers trailed us like ghosts. An executive in a sleek navy suit stood at the gate, tablet in hand. He nodded to the security officers flanking him. "Miss Sable," he said, voice firm but neutral. "We've reviewed the footage. We need your explanation." His eyes rested on me, then flicked to Elowen, waiting. Elowen's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She opened her mouth, closed it. The crowd watched. "This video," the executive began, tapping the screen. The display changed to the cabin camera's recording. There was Elowen's hand brushing along two identical bags before boarding, the subtle switch, the snatch at my seat. The evidence was so clear that even the crew quieted at the revelation. Elowen's face drained further. She stuttered, But no argument followed. Her voice quivered, a broken record skipping in shame. Security officers stepped forward. One spoke quietly into his radio, another reached for cuffs. The one nearest Elowen peeled her uniform jacket off her shoulders as if shedding falseness. He snapped the cuffs on her wrists. The click echoed across the hall. Passengers stiffened. Some held their breath. Others covered their mouths, shocked into silence. A few dared a faint applause. I watched, not triumphant, but serene. This moment never belonged to vengeance. It belonged to justice. As Elowen was led away, airline staff approached me. One offered my handbag, the same one she'd held hostage, and apologized softly. "Ms. Miles, on behalf of Air Valor, we deeply regret this breach." Others murmured in agreement, like a chorus shifting allegiance. I turned slowly to face the crowd. My legs trembled, but my voice was crisp. "Justice isn't loud," I said. "Sometimes it's simply seen." A hush fell. I looked at the elderly man from row 14A. I saw Mark, the attendant who'd hesitated. I saw the woman whose phone had captured the switch. These ordinary people, witnesses, had chosen honesty in the moment it mattered. Tears threatened in my eyes, but I collected them. I nodded to those who'd believed before it was convenient. "Thank you," I whispered. The cuffs clinked again as Elowen's silhouette receded. Security separated us. I rose above the swirl of camera clicks and murmurs. A hush followed me. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down. "Your board wants a meeting. This changes everything." My chest tightened. The fight hadn't ended. It had just changed arenas. The mother and daughter arriving nearby parted as I passed. I saw my mother's face in the terminal crowd, eyes wide, mouth parted. Neither of us spoke, no apology needed. Our eyes held that conversation. As I walked away from the gate and toward what lay ahead, I felt that I no longer walked into who I once was. By the time I stepped out of the terminal and into the corporate car waiting to take me to Air Valor's Atlanta headquarters, my body ached in places I didn't know could hurt. But it wasn't from the flight. It was from carrying the weight of 100 unsaid things for far too long. The glass-paneled boardroom overlooked the runways. Jets took off in the distance, almost mockingly calm. Inside, the air buzzed with tension, dressed in pinstripes and patent leather. They had been waiting. Legal counsel sat with arms crossed. The CEO, a woman I'd only met once during a diversity panel, leaned forward, expression unreadable. A screen flickered on. There it was again. Elowen's hand, her eyes darting, the bag swap. Another clip showed me seated, unaware of the chaos to come. My name echoed in the room with each report cited. Passenger testimonials, the old letter from my father, the security officer's statement. The CEO cleared her throat. Miss Miles, on behalf of Air Valor, we acknowledge the grave mishandling of this situation. Effective immediately, Elowen Sable is suspended pending a full investigation. HR has been instructed to launch an internal audit into supervisory conduct. I nodded, not with pride, but with quiet relief. My voice didn't need to raise. Truth had done the heavy lifting for me this time. A PR handler whispered that the press had gathered near the lounge and asked if I'd make a statement. I agreed, not for the cameras, but for the ones who'd watched quietly from the sidelines, waiting for someone to speak their experience into the light. I stepped up to the podium. My words weren't rehearsed. I never asked for credit, I began. I asked only to be seen. Today, truth was seen. Microphones pointed. Journalists scribbled notes. One reporter asked if I forgave my sister. I forgive myself, I replied, for staying quiet too long. As for the rest, time will show what's genuine. Just then, the elderly man from row 14 stepped forward. His cane tapped against the floor, but his steps were purposeful. He reached out and hugged me. My throat tightened. We'd shared no words before, but in that embrace, I felt more solidarity than from years within my own family. Later that evening, I returned to my mother's house. She opened the door slowly, her eyes red-rimmed. The air was thick with all the things left unspoken for too long. I placed the letter from my father, creased but still legible, on the kitchen table. He believed in me, I said, voice calm. It's yours if you're ready to read it. She sat down, the weight of years collapsing into that chair with her. Fingers trembling, she traced the edges of the envelope but didn't open it yet. I was wrong, she said softly. I was so blind. I let your sister carry a truth that wasn't hers, and let you carry silence that wasn't yours. There were no dramatic tears, just quiet acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. A few days passed. The media frenzy cooled. Elowen called from an unknown number. I didn't ignore it. Her voice cracked on the other end. I'm sorry, Joe. I lost control. I was angry, jealous. I didn't know how to undo it. I didn't yell. I didn't coddle. I listened. You don't need to make a public apology, I said finally. But if you mean what you say, call me again when you're ready to own your actions, not just your guilt. Click. She wasn't in uniform anymore. I saw a photo. Someone had sent it anonymously. Her name badge was gone. The shine in her eyes, too. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't the same either. Some scars don't ache, but they do whisper. The next morning, I took a ride to a quiet little home tucked behind a peach orchard. The old man from row 14 lived there. I knocked, tickets in hand. I don't need a reward, he said as he opened the door. It's not a reward, I replied. It's gratitude. I wouldn't have made it through that flight without people like you. He smiled, eyes glassy. You flew before the plane ever did, sweetheart. You just forgot how high. Later that afternoon, I walked through the Atlanta terminal again, no longer hiding behind efficiency or titles. A few employees nodded. A gate agent said, "We're proud of you." I nodded back, not for them, for the version of me that once believed silence was safer. As I boarded a new flight, not under Elowen's crew, not under anyone's shadow, I found my seat, placed my bag beneath the one marked Jolie Miles, and exhaled. I didn't just get my bag back, I got my voice. In the end, this story wasn't just about a stolen bag. It was about how silence, when broken, can become strength. It reminds us that even when the people closest to us try to erase our voice, the truth has a way of rising. What would you have done if your own sibling tried to ruin you in front of the world? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more real, raw, and powerful stories coming your way.